Okay. Welcome everybody. I had a scheduled live stream for my Patreon VIP patrons, but something was going on with the microphone. I couldn't get any audio, so I'm just doing a public live. So if you are out there and you would like to drop by and say hi, finishing up some dinner, but I had some stuff I wanted to talk about. I just got a brand new book in the mail, the new Hermenea Commentary on Jonah by Susan Neidich, which came out earlier this year, and I love the book of Jonah. I have a presentation I have given on Jonah a number of times, and so I'm excited to break into this. So I thought I might talk a little bit about Jonah during this live stream. If you're joining me for right now, I had a live stream scheduled for right now with my Patreon patrons, and something went wrong with the setup with the audio, and I had to stop that live stream, and I couldn't get that live stream that my patrons had an unlisted link for back. So I said, hey, do you guys mind if I just do a public one? And they said that would be fine. So thank you for joining me. Those of you coming from the Patreon live stream, sorry it's not as intimate a setting, but I think it'll be a little more lively now. Yeah, I hope it's enjoyable. I am, like I mentioned, I just got back a little bit ago from taking my 11-year-old daughter to go play golf. My wife had some dinner ready when I got back. I showered real quick. I'm just going to finish some dinner. So I will be talking a bit during that. And then I want to bust into this book a little bit, talk about Jonah, talk about how I present Jonah when I do that. And I'll also be available to answer some questions. Ooh, excuse me. You referenced Chris Hayes in one of your last podcasts. I did. He was my OT professor at Fuller and one of my faves. Chris is a great guy, a great scholar. His wife is also a wonderful person and a wonderful scholar. And yeah, I'm looking forward to saying hi to them in November. I anticipate there'll be this big biblical studies conference in San Antonio that I'm going to. That's where I usually say hi. Putt. No, we went and played 18 holes of golf at a real golf course. My 11-year-old is getting into snowboarding and golf with me. So, well, I've been playing golf for 30 years. So, so she has been wanting to learn how to play. So we've played a handful of times recently. So we were just out today. Hey, Kippy, hope things are going okay. Hope you're not getting too much flack from the online mythicists. Do you think the book of Jonah has any mythical antecedents such as Wanes, the fish / God? I wouldn't say that's outside the realm of possibility, but I haven't looked at it closely enough to know. Although I imagine that Susan's new Hermenea commentary on Jonah might bring that up if there is a case to make. In fact, let me take a look and see if she says anything about the fish. Okay. Comparative folklore and reception. Among the folk motifs of Jonah, the fish swallowing a man has the largest number of international parallels and holds the greatest fascination for appropriators of the tale. She evidently published a paper on this called Fish Swallows Man, The Tale of Jonah and Its Reception History in Folkloristic Perspective in an edited volume, Va'ed Yaleh, edited by Peter Machinist from 2021, so a recent volume. Let me see if she makes any specific connections. Scholars frequently compare the experience of Jonah to that of several classical heroes, including Phalanthus, the hero of Brundisium and Tarentum, rescued by a dolphin, Icarios, Corianos, and Arion. More malevolent images are provided by the representation of Jason as an Etruscan mirror, depicting the hero sword drawn battling a huge snake that seeks to swallow him, and an Attic vase that depicts the hero emerging from the enormous gullet of a sea monster. The fish in Jonah is not described as particularly benevolent or malevolent, an important ambiguity to keep in mind. So it sounds like there is quite a lot of literary context to choose from. So maybe it's more probable than just plausible. Okay, it seems like we've got quite a few folks jumping in. UFC 291, Spence versus Crawford, and a Dan live in the same day. There is a God. God with a little G, I noticed you put in there. FYI, mythicists are nothing if not relentless. That is true. Hey Dan, can you tell us if it is really a whale or a fish in the original Hebrew? I think it just says great fish. Let me take a look. Yeah, it says dag gadol, which would just be great fish. So not the word for whale isn't there. Yeah, great fish or big fish. All right, Dan, where in the New Testament does it say that there must be 12 apostles and that they must be male? Asking for a friend. So in the book of Acts, we have this statement that, let me get there. I think it's should be at the end of chapter 1, isn't it? Okay, in those days Peter stood up. So Acts 1:15, in those days Peter stood up. 16, brothers, the scripture had to be fulfilled that the Holy Spirit foretold through David concerning Judas, blah, blah, blah. Story of Judas's death. Thus one, okay, so Acts 1:21, thus one of the men, and the word there is ton sinothonton himin andron. So that would mean one of those traveling around with us, one of the men, and that's specifically a human male. One of the men who accompanied us during all the time the Lord Jesus associated with us, beginning from his baptism, blah, blah, blah. One of these must become a witness of his resurrection together with us. So they proposed two candidates, Joseph called Barsabbas and Matthias, and they prayed, and then they cast lots. So they rolled the dice to see who it would be, and they chose Matthias. So it sounds like the Peter, or the author of Acts, is suggesting that Peter is saying that based on the scripture, we have to replace this one who was traveling around with Jesus. And so it seems inferent, we could infer from that the apostles needed to be number 12, and it would seem like it's suggesting needed to be drawn from those specifically men, according to the Greek text, that were traveling around with Jesus. This is obviously not how the apostles are known from the writings of Paul. So either Acts is representing this in a specific way, in their own way, trying to suggest, no, it has to be 12, no, it has to be men. And Paul and others are like, none of that matters. Or things changed, or maybe there's something else. So, yeah, from the book of Acts, it seems to suggest that, but I would not suggest that that one text in the book of Acts means that that is historical, or that that was considered authoritative or a prescription that everybody honored. Because according to Paul, there were a bunch of different apostles, and not all of them men. So Daniel James asks, can you do a study on the mark of the beast? I've got probably a dozen videos on the mark of the beast. Well, the number of the beast, at least. And I usually comment on the mark of the beast, which is probably conflating two different things. The idea that it's on the hand and the forehead is the only place in all of the Bible where you see something that's going to be on a hand and on the forehead is in Deuteronomy 6, where you have the prescription to bind the words of the law to your hand and to your forehead, which results in later Judaism in the practice of using phylacteries, tefillin, a little box with some paper with a handful of passages from the Torah inscribed on them that are wrapped around the forehead. And then you have a leather strap that usually goes down the left arm and then is wrapped around the left hand. So in that way, the text is bound to the forehead and to the hand. So it's probably alluding to that, suggesting this mark is going to be kind of like a counterfeit phylactery or something like that, but it also treats it like Roman coinage, because you got this idea that the image of the beast is on there and that the name of the beast is on there, and then the number of the beast's name is 666, which is pretty straightforward gematria for Nero Caesar. So it is somebody writing at the end of the 1st century CE who is using this myth about Nero as the great persecutor, as well as this myth of Nero redivivus. He's going to come back either from hiding or from the dead, take back over the Roman Empire. And so using that to kind of freak everybody out, and in that way motivate them, compel them to greater fidelity to their Christian identity. And then they also want to suggest that you're not allowed to participate in Roman society, that it's kind of a separatist take. No, if you're going to be, you're either all the way in or you're all the way out. And this is one of the ways that the book of Revelation was deployed by Athanasius for his own boundary maintenance, for saying we got all these heretics and they are the beast and they are the people who are condemned in the book of Revelation. And so it's a way to draw a much stricter, much firmer line boundary around Christianity. And that's one of the reasons that Athanasius liked the text so much, and probably the reason that it ended up in the canon. And seriously, Dan, let's go snowboarding. I would love to go snowboarding. I'm not great at it. I grew up skiing. I went to high school in a little town called Niwot in Colorado, and so occasionally I would skip school, and a friend of mine and I would take a bus from Boulder up to a place called Eldora. And so I skied a lot in high school, and then learned how to snowboard in my 20s, and never got really good at it, but I'm trying to show my daughter the ropes. But yeah, I'd love to go snowboarding. Do you think that Deuteronomy, or something like our current Deuteronomy, was made by Josiah's court during his reforms? Or do you think it goes back maybe to an earlier school? I think that the earliest core of Deuteronomy probably was composed under Josiah's reign, and that it accumulated over time a lot more, and later generations added to it. And a great book on this, I would recommend Thomas Romer. I don't know if you could hear me there. Thomas Romer, The So-Called Deuteronomistic History, from, I think this is 2009, 2007. This edition anyway is from 2007. This is a great discussion of Deuteronomy and how it likely came together, and what were likely the earliest segments of it. Any perspective on the differing birth accounts between Matthew and Luke? Yeah, they're just, the two authors just had different traditions in front of them, and or came up with different genealogies in order to serve different rhetorical goals. I don't think there's anything to the notion that these both are accurate and that there's a way to harmonize them. I think it's just two different authors with two different traditions. Ooh, favorite comic book artist? That's a great question. Give me a second. Jim Lee got me interested in comic book art initially. Then I read a bunch of kind of golden age comics, and so some of those early, very early Marvel artists, I was just entranced by. And then I got into Spawn. I really liked Todd McFarlane. I thought that Greg Capullo I think he has matured into just a phenomenal comic book artist. Joe Madureira on the X-Men, I really, really enjoyed. Um, I think that, oh shoot, what's her name? Oh, that's gonna bug me. Whenever I don't need to know her name, I can bring it up immediately. But when I need to bring it up, I can't remember it. She was on the Miles Morales run of Spider-Man, and I thought her take on Venom was one of the coolest I've ever seen. It's much more monstrous than anthropomorphic. Shoot, give me just 1 second. I'm trying to remember the specific the specific run of Spider-Man that she was on. Is it Sarah Pacelli? Pacelli? Sarah Pacelli. Yeah, Sarah Pacelli, I think, is a phenomenal comic book artist as well. I would say she's one of my favorites. And then the death and life of Superman. Like I had subscriptions to all four of the Superman titles and was collecting all those. And I really enjoyed some of the artists on there. Whoever was the artist for Action Comics at that time, I just couldn't stand that artist, whoever that was. But Superman and Superman Man of Steel, I really enjoyed the artists there, even though some of them were a little kind of idiosyncratic. What's the one question you wish you would be asked about but never seem to be asked about? Ooh. I don't know that I get asked so many questions and so many questions I have never think of that I don't know that I have questions that I wish people would ask me. I think people do a wonderful job of coming up with very creative questions. Now, there are also a lot of people who ask me the same questions over and over again, and when I'm in different venues, I can't get upset about that. But um, question, why now to eat? Well, I explained when I first came on that I just got back from taking my daughter to go play golf, and I showered real quick, and my wife had some dinner ready for me. I intended to eat before the live stream that I had scheduled at 5:30, but the round of golf went very long, and so I didn't have time. So I am very hungry, and so I let people know at the start I am going to be eating during this. You have probably been asked this before. Never can get a clear answer. Ishtar and Marduk and Esther and Mordecai, any connection? Almost certainly some kind of connection. Um, is Mormon cosmology Neoplatonist? There is definitely a Platonic influence, but not. You can't go back to Plato or Plotinus or Neoplatonism and have an exact match. It's not isometric. It's been filtered through a bunch of lenses, but there is absolutely a Platonic influence. Should we view Jesus as a newborn or closer to 2 years old in Matthew's account? It doesn't really give a timeline, but I think definitely not a newborn. Which books, if any, should not be in the Bible canon, and which books, if any, should be included? That's more of an ideological concern. I think the books that are in the canon that came the closest to not being in the canon, that I think many scholars lament ended up in the canon. Revelation would be top of the list, and then things like Hebrews and some of the pseudo Pauline epistles. In terms of other books that had the best case for being in the canon, but for whatever reason were left out, I think the two or three that probably have the best case would be The Shepherd of Hermas, The Didache was probably, or Didache was another one that was quite influential. And then the, what is the other one? Oh, shoot. There's another one, Barnabas. Those three were very, very considered authoritative and were very, very popular in early Christianity, but for whatever reason fell out of favor. The Book of Enoch was also phenomenally popular within early Judaism and for a bit within early Christianity, but for a variety of reasons was abandoned. Oh, looks like all the comments refreshed. I'm trying to go through them and make sure I'm not missing any good questions or concerns. What do you think about using modern versus ancient pronunciation of Greek/Hebrew when reading biblical and other ancient texts? For Greek, I usually default to modern just because with my previous job, I worked for 7-8 years on a project in modern Greek. So I've spent quite a lot of time in Greece. And so just so that I don't have to constantly code switch regarding which pronunciation convention I'm using, I just default to modern. With Hebrew, I think most biblical scholars and so the Erasmian pronunciation of Greek is more popular within biblical scholarship. So I sound weird when I'm speaking among biblical scholars. I think most biblical scholars default to more modern pronunciation of Hebrew when discussing biblical Hebrew, and that's partly because there are an awful lot of native speakers of Hebrew who engage in biblical scholarship. Do you think the narrative Samuel has any historical value for reconstructing a historical David? Do you think that David, Solomon, or United Kingdom have any historicity? I think there's probably some historicity to a a core to the David, Solomon, Saul story. I don't think there's historicity to a United Kingdom. That is a later fiction. There are some books that have been written about how to reconstruct a historical David. Joel Baden wrote one, and Jacob Wright wrote one. So if you are interested in how scholars use the story, the narrative in Samuel to reconstruct a historical David, those would be two books you could go look at. What is Matt Page like in real life? I didn't have enough time to talk with him and find out. Seems like a great guy. But for those who aren't aware, there's a guy named Matt Page who is an illustrator and a writer, an author, who primarily works within kind of a heterodox Mormon community. And he did me a very high honor. He creates these like liturgical candles with prominent Latter-day Saints on them, and they look kind of like Orthodox icons. And then one day I saw a picture of me that he did. So this is actually this was gifted to me yesterday at the Sunstone Symposium, where I was one of the plenary speakers. This is a puzzle that it's a puzzle of this image that he drew, which is obviously me. So I saw him briefly, and I thanked him for this incredibly high honor. And then we had to be shooed out of the room that we were in because there was another presentation that was teeing up. So I am going to a picnic tonight for the Sunstone Symposium, and we'll be a part of their quiz night. So hopefully Matt's there and I get to chat with him a little bit because we shook hands and spoke for 90 seconds. So I didn't. No love for Magnola. I like Magnola. I like Frank Miller as well. I think Magnola, I follow him on, I don't know if he's on Instagram or Twitter. I think I follow him. But yeah, I love his artwork, but I think I would classify him and Frank Miller as a little more idiosyncratic. I appreciate what they do, but I think folks like Capullo and Pacelli, their command of the anatomy and their storytelling, I think is just second to none. So there's that. um, what are your thoughts on the work of Mircea Eliade and his conceptions of the sacred and the profane? Uh, were trend-setting in their day, outdated these days. I think I like the cognitive science of religion, which in some ways resonates with some of those things, but they're not the same thing. So his idea of the idea of archetypes and things like that, I think uh, is close to what the experimental data show, but not exactly the same. So similar to the way that Wittgenstein's idea of family resemblances is very close to prototype theory, which was developed within cognitive linguistics, but they're not exactly the same. So I think those are philosophers and anthropologists who intuitively kind of approximated an understanding of the way the human mind works without the benefit of the scientific insight that decades of research and experimentation provide us now. What are some time periods and cultures that interest you most besides what your specific fields of study is? I think that's a great question. I think the time period that I spend more of my recreational reading time, which is slim to none most times, is the American founding, the Revolutionary period. That has always fascinated me. Johnny Tremain was one of the first novels I can recall reading, and fell in love with that book and that area and that time period. And so I've always been fascinated by that ever since. So if you look on my bookshelf, if it's not biblical studies or religious studies, and this is like 0.1% of the books that I have digitally, but if you look on there, there are more books about the Constitution and the founding and the founding fathers and that kind of stuff than any other period. Can you explain the meaning of the term doulos? Does it mean slave or servant? Yes, it can mean either. I think we have a clearer distinction between slave and servant than they probably did anciently. But I think translators would do better to just render slave, um, because I think there's an apologetic dimension to avoiding that translation. People try to use the fact that it's not race based as some kind of reason to avoid it, but that's, I think, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So I think slave is a fine translation. And folks who want to drill underneath that and understand it more clearly are just going to have to do that on their own. There's Translating is a balancing act. You have to balance how far you're willing to um, bring the source text to the target audience, and in doing that, you are changing it, you are altering it, you are departing from the source society and culture and language and literary milieu to get closer to the target audience so that they have to do less work to understand. And then you have to think about that, and you balance that against how far you are going to require the target audience to move to approximate the source text, where you leave it closer to the way it functioned anciently and originally. But there's more work that the reader has to do in order to achieve an adequate level of understanding, because there's so much content, semantic content in there that we are missing out on because we don't know the context back then. We don't know the all of the literary conventions. We don't know the historical situations phenomenally well in most instances. So you have to strike a balance. How far are you going to require the reader to go versus how far you're going to bring the source text to the reader? And with something like doulos, you have to decide between, servant is, in a sense, I think, trying to bring the text closer to the reader so as to sidestep the idea of slave, where slave, I think, is probably a little bit more accurate, but it is also requiring the reader do more work to understand the difference between, or the different kinds of slavery that existed back then. So that is probably a lot more than you wanted to hear about that, but and the comments refreshed again. So where to buy the puzzle? Ooh, that's a great question. Let me see if Matt Page has a. I'm sure Matt Page has a website. He does. It's called mattpage.com.com. So I'll put it in here. So mattpage.com is all spelled out. mattpagedotcom. So that's on there. So he's got some books, Future Day Saints, which is fiction books that he's written that are using that are oriented to a Latter-day Saint audience. And then I'm sure he has all projects, design, illustration. Yeah, he's got all kinds of stuff on that website. And he's even got like Garbage Pail Kid cards, but they're his own thing that I think are pretty creative. Okay. Can modern Greeks read the NT in its original form? If they have studied ancient Greek, modern Greek is quite distinct from ancient Greek. There's a lot of similarities in vocabulary, but the grammar, the syntax, the accentuation, the accents that they use are very different. And so, if you go to Greece, you can go find a New Testament where it will have the ancient Greek on one page and modern Greek on a facing page, so that folks can see the differences. And uh, yeah, there are many people who grow up learning ancient Greek, Koine Greek, classical Greek, so that they can engage with all of that literature. So it would be like if, um, hang on a second, I hear somebody choking. Okay, they're okay. Um, it would be like if Beowulf and things like that were a lot more popular among English speakers. And so, like, one of the things you could do go in elementary school and in high school would be like study early modern English or um, old English or something like that. And, like significant portions of the English speaking population did that. So there are more people who are Greek speakers who learn ancient Greek than there are English speakers who learn like old English. How much did Zoroastrianism influence Judaism in the Persian period? That is an open question right now. Probably a lot, but we're missing a lot of data. And a lot of the scholars who work in Old Persian are not trained biblical scholars, and a lot of trained biblical scholars are not trained in Old Persian. And so there's a bit of the research is a little siloed. So maybe one day we'll have somebody who specializes in both, or we'll have lots of people who specialize in both, and we'll have a lot more work done in that area to generate more theories about how things went. But right now, it's kind of like, yeah, it seems like there's some influence. We can identify some things within early Judaism that resonate quite a bit with things that we see in Zoroastrianism, but there aren't a lot of robust theoretical frameworks for exactly how that happened. Could double as a lunchbox. Yeah. If I have a daughter who's 14 who likes to give me a hard time about being TikTok famous. So when we were at Disneyland last year, and somebody recognized me and came up and said hi, and she was like, "Ooh, Dad, it's one of your fans." So I should yeah make her carry that to school as a lunchbox. Does Romans 1:4 indicate Paul thought Jesus was made Son of God by adoption at his resurrection? I think Paul is conflating a few different frameworks for understanding Jesus's relationship with God, and so I think there's a degree of adoptionism, but um, Paul is also incorporating kind of the name bearing angel framework and some other ideas. So I think it's there to some degree, but it's not the main or the only theory. And yeah, there's a Paul Holloway's Hermenea commentary, so the same series as this one on Philippians, goes into some more detail about Paul's kind of Christology, which I think is great. What do you think of the possibility that Jesus was bipolar and in the midst of a manic episode during his time? If you look at Mark 3:20 to 21, his family clearly thinks he's lost his mind. That would be a way to kind of historicize this and try to pathologize the behavior. But I think that the way that the text is framing this behavior has more to do with how it served their literary rhetorical goals than a reflection of actual behavior. And so I'm not I don't find theories about certain um, conditions or things like that that Jesus may have had. I don't find them incredibly convincing. Let's see. What podcast do you recommend for LDS audiences and for biblical scholarship listeners? Um, I had lunch yesterday with Steve Pineacker of Mormon Book Review. I think that's a great podcast. I have been on a handful of wonderful LDS podcasts, and because I'm on the spot, their names all escape me at the moment. But Faith Matters was one that I was impressed with the interviewers there, and I have listened to other episodes that I thought were pretty good. So Faith Matters is one for LDS audiences. For biblical scholarship, my podcast, the Data Over Dogma podcast, I think is great. Bart Ehrman has a newish podcast with one half of Digital Hammurabi, the better half. So I think that would be a great podcast to check out. The Bible for Normal People is with Pete Enns and Jared Bias. I think that's a great podcast as well. I'm not a huge consumer of podcasts though, so I don't know that I can do much more than share podcasts that I know of that friends of mine are a part of or that I have appeared on, or that folks who I have interviewed. Do you think that the Timothys should be removed from biblical canon considering their authorship? I think as long as people acknowledge that they are pseudepigrapha, I don't think it matters if they're in the canon or not. So I think that's more of an ideological question, not something um, for biblical scholarship. Any thought on Craig Keener commentaries? Meh. I don't think they are better than many others that are out there, and in a lot of ways, I think they don't measure up. And thank you to everybody who is just writing comments saying thanks for your work. I appreciate it. Keep doing what you're doing. I appreciate this. That means a lot to hear. I catch a lot of flack online, not so much in person, but I catch a lot of flack on well, mainly on Twitter. So it is always appreciated to hear from folks who think there is value in what I'm doing. It makes it easier to digest the flack that I catch. How dare you mention the great comic book artist and not mention Ramita Sr.? I can't mention everybody. I'm just mentioning the standouts, the people who influenced my collection habits. Thoughts on the Da Vinci Code? It did more damage to the public understanding of the Bible and religion than almost any other thing published within the last 100 years. Can you talk more about the transition of Adonai from an anthropomorphic deity to a disembodied deity? Heard it mentioned that Greek philosophy was influential on this, but which schools / philosophers? So I talk about that quite a bit in my book, Adonai's Divine Images, A Cognitive Approach, and talk about the corporeality and the anthropomorphism of God. But within ancient Israel, God had a body, but God was separable from that body. God's agency, the locus of their agency and their self, was separable, which is not unique to deities. That's something that the conceptualization of human persons includes that possibility as well, although primarily after death. Um, and so God can be conceptualized as material, but can also be somebody who is unseen and is able to observe all that's going on without being corporeally, visibly present. And yeah, I think when you get the concept of the dichotomy of the material and the immaterial, which is something that arises from primarily a Platonic outlook, but some other philosophies were influential as well. I think that's something that's adopted within Christianity before Judaism. So there's a paper called Anthropomorphism and Its Eradication by Shama Friedman in a book called Iconoclasm and Iconoclash. I think that's the name of the book. But that paper talks about how a corporeal conceptualization of deity slowly was dismantled within early Christianity, and then in a later period with early Judaism. It's like Maimonides by the time it is totally eradicated within Judaism, but within early Christianity, it's around the 3rd or the 4th century, where you have some not a bishop but a deacon or something like that going out to some of the monasteries in Egypt when the church is trying to take over control of the monasteries and like convincing this famous monk that God does not have a body, and he breaks down crying because he does not know who to pray to or what to imagine the entity to whom they're praying is like. Says something like, "You've taken my God from me, and I don't know who I'm praying to," or something like that. I think that's 3rd century, 3rd or 4th century CE. But yeah, in my book, I go into more detail about that, and I also provide references to other books that talk about that quite a bit. And then, forgotten his name, "The Bodies of God and the World of Ancient Israel" by Benjamin Summer is another great discussion of divine anthropomorphism, even though I critique parts of it in my book. Is this a Christian channel? I am a Christian, but it is not a Christian channel. I focus on the scholarship. I'm sorry, the comments keep updating as I scroll, and so things are going by too quickly. Hi, I know is not your main target, but are you thinking about more videos in Spanish? Yes, I'm planning to do more videos in Spanish, but my my schedule is so crazy these days that that's the kind of thing that I kind of have to plan out a little further in advance than a lot of my videos. Uh, it happens more rarely, but yes, there is a plan to do that more regularly. What's your golf handicap? I don't have one right now. The last time I kept one was probably 10 years ago when I played in a qualifier for the US Amateur, and it was like 2.5. It was around scratch when I graduated from high school, when I played 7, 8 times a week. But in the last 10 years, I play maybe 3 or 4 times a year. Although now that I have a new job that has and gives me more free time in bursts, and I have a little bit more money, I've been playing golf more this year. So, um, don't forget to hit the like button. Yeah, that's something I always wonder why it's so important to people to be like, smash that like button. I never remember to do that. But if there is some value to you or to me by smashing that like button, then by all means, smash the like button. And if you're not a subscriber, by all means, smash that other button as well. What's the current status of the quest for historical Jesus? It excuse me. It's kind of in transition. There's a journal called the Journal for the Study of the Historical Jesus, or Journal for the Historical Jesus. Let me check that out. Journal for the Study of the Historical Jesus, which is probably still edited by my my good friend James Crossley. And Anthony Ladon. Oh no, they just stepped down in 2022. So now Sarah Rollins and Robert Miles. Sarah Rollins is wonderful. They are incumbent executive editors. But Crossley published an article recently talking about the next wave of I think it's like the fourth wave of the quest for the historical Jesus, but they're really kind of trying to reconsider what this is all about. Um, if you go look up Journal for the Study of the Historical Jesus, some of the volumes are open access. So Brandon Massey published a paper in April called "The Quest for the Historical Jesus, 2000 to 2023." So it's kind of provides a bibliography of historical Jesus research from 2000 to 2023. In addition to the bibliography, a brief introductory essay identifies trends in historical Jesus research. So, like, that would be the best place to go to find out more. But they're really trying to figure out what this all means. What is the value of it? What have we discovered to this point? So it's kind of in a transitionary state. What do you think of mythicism? Is their view justifiable in any way? I think there's I would never say you shouldn't study something. I think there's always going to be value in chasing down questions like this. But mythicism seems to me to get more popular the more zany it gets, and its main um, purveyors and champions I do not find to be incredibly helpful scholars or incredibly upstanding people in many cases. How are you doing today? I am doing wonderfully. I am tired. I got up, I mowed the neighbor's lawn with my daughter because she's trying to earn a little money. So I go with her and do the parts of the mowing and the weed whacking and everything that she can't do. And then we went and played golf, and it's 100 degrees today. So that took a lot out of me. But I'm enjoying a wonderful dinner, and I am excited to go to the Sunstone Symposium picnic after this and go do their quiz night, which I know nothing about, but somebody thinks that I'm going to be their ringer, and they are sadly mistaken if the questions are all about Mormon history. Excuse me. If it's about the scriptures, yeah, I'll be a ringer, but not if it's about Mormon history. A lot of people are so much better than me at that. Did Matthew make up a prophecy that the Tanakh lacks in chapter 2, verse 23? So, so that's where he says he'll be a Nazarene, right? Yeah, be called a Nazarene. Nobody knows if there's anything to that, or if this is something from some unknown pseudepigraphical text that at the time was considered authoritative, or if Matthew was just like, he's from Nazareth. Why? Let's make up a reason why he has to be from Nazareth. And if that's the case, that's pretty good evidence that that is evidence that the his origins in Nazareth are pretty well established. Excuse me. But like there's another time in Matthew where, which one is it? Oh yeah, when he talks about Judas's death, and he quotes a passage and says, "Oh yeah, that's in Ezekiel." It's not. It's in Jeremiah, and scholars don't know what to do with that. Was was the author just like, I think that's Ezekiel, or is there some reason that they quoted something different? We don't know. Why do you think fundamentalism took precedent rather than a critical analysis to understanding one's faith in America? Because a critical analysis would have undermined the attempts on the part of evangelical Christians to structure power in their favor. Fundamentalism allows them to consolidate a lot of power and structure it in their favor. And, that's what happened in the 70s with the rise of the religious right, which was something that was intentionally planned out, calculated, and executed so that there would be more agents of evangelical fundamentalism within the US government so that their interests could be centered and they could be given priority. So that's something and there are a number of different ways that has escalated since the 70s. And people like Trump and DeSantis and others are the unfortunate outcome of those campaigns. So, and there's lots of great scholarship on that. The Southern Strategy, uh, folks like Paul Weyrich and Jerry Falwell, and the anti-abortion campaign, and even the NRA being taken over by extremists in '77. A lot of great scholarship on that. But that is all something that arises from evangelicalism setting up pretty firm boundaries and engaging in ongoing power structuring and boundary maintenance. Any suggested reading on historical early Hebrew history? Also, I was there for your class on Revelation. I loved it. Your work has influenced me to go to college for theology and religion. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that, and I hope you enjoy your time studying theology and religion. I think it's incredibly valuable, and we need a lot more people out there willing to think critically about that and then take that critical thinking into the public. Suggested reading on historical early Hebrew history. There are general histories about early Israel and Judah. I think the standard, the one you'll read in most like undergraduate history of Israel classes, is by probably Miller and Hayes. Yeah, Miller and Hayes, originally from 1986, A History of Ancient Israel and Judah. There was a second edition published in 2006, A History of Ancient Israel and Judah. There are all kinds of histories that you can find if you want to look at the language, if you want to look at the literature, if you want to look at the ritual, if you want to look at the geopolitics, if you want to look at the concept of God. So, like Mark Smith has a couple of wonderful books, The Early History of God and The Origins of Biblical Monotheism, that are talking about, obviously, the early history of God. What do I have here? I've got a stack of books here, but there are a handful of books that have just been published on the origins of Adonai, the God of Israel. Ted Lewis published one. A gentleman by the name of Robert Miller II published one, and then Daniel Fleming published another one. That's part of a series of books that he's doing on the early history of Israel. And I published a review article in the Journal for the American Academy of Religion of those three books. So, like, if you want to look at the early history of God, there's a ton of stuff. If you want to look at the history of the language, there's a ton of great stuff. There's a sociolinguistic history of Hebrew by William Schneidevin, that was published a handful of years ago. That was great. Seth Sanders wrote a great book on the invention of Hebrew. There are lots of great stuff on the language. So yeah, it depends on what you want to look at, and I could just ramble on forever about that, but I'm gonna gonna have to move on. What comic books issues would you recommend to people trying to get into them? Just getting into comics in general, ooh, that's a broad that's a big ask. I think it depends on what kind of stuff you're interested in. If you're interested in the superhero stuff, if you're interested in the more kind of slow burn psychological stuff, if you're interested in stuff for kids, like I introduced my daughter to comic books through a series called Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, which is a great series that was just turned into a cartoon a little bit ago. That is on Disney Channel? I think it may be Disney Channel, maybe another, streaming service, but, that's a wonderful comic. So, yes, Watchmen, if you wanna just get a great sense for, a great intellectual take on comic books. Watchmen was a great kind of meta critique of superheroes. Sandman is a wonderful comic. That is one that's phenomenally popular. There's just too much to uh, to to do in just a couple minutes. Is Dan Brown writing much nowadays? I thought I heard about something, but I think he's too busy cashing checks. Do, 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 do. I like showing my students this concept by showing them how the angel of the Lord and God himself are basically interchangeable in parts of Exodus where they flee Egypt. Yeah, in fact, that's a big part of my book. I have one of my chapters is about the angel of the Lord and how Exodus 23, 20 and 21 are the author kind of saying, this is why the angel can be identified as God in some places. You should maybe hire a social media manager type that could act as a buffer for hate comments. I should hire a social media manager for a lot of reasons. But I'm not making that much money yet. So at some point, if I make more money doing this, I will absolutely hire a social media manager and ask them to filter that kind of stuff. But I kind of there's a part of me that doesn't want to skip over that because I don't want it to turn into an echo chamber where I am shielded from criticism. And sometimes there is legitimate criticism, even if it is shrouded in vituperative, hateful speech. So I need that to some degree to keep me humble, and also so that I can be made aware of the blind spots and where I am going wrong. So because sometimes I see myself kind of getting full of myself, and so those comments are helpful. So it would have to be a very insightful social media manager. What's your favorite food? That's an interesting question. I like it depends on my mood. It depends on what I'm in the mood for. I really love I'm kind of a an easy person to please. I grew up very poor, so the things that get my motor running are pizza, buffalo wings, tacos, I love a good butter chicken. There's a restaurant I could throw a couldn't throw a baseball. I could hit a golf ball to a restaurant called Guras, which is Nepali Indian food, and that's phenomenal. But yeah, even there are sometimes when like a big old bowl of cereal will just hit the spot because we rarely had cereal when I was growing up, and it was always such a treat. And so it is still a comfort food for me. Um, But yeah, if my wife is just like, let's order some dinner tonight. What do you feel like?" And yeah, usually pizza and buffalo wings are my first go to. How's your next book going? It has not started yet. I'm waiting on a contract, but I do have a contract on the way for a book that will basically be a greatest. Well, my, my agent said, "Don't announce anything yet until you have the contract." So, I have a book on the way, um, but I was also told, "Don't start working on it until you have the contract." So, don't tell anybody about that. Uh, Okay, everything refreshed again. So, have you seen Sound of Freedom yet? It's great. Uh, um, not a huge fan of Operation Underground Railroad. There are much better outfits out there who are doing much better work in that regard. When did supersessionism emerge as a topic of debate among early Christians? I mean, like immediately. Um, a lot of Yeah, that's supersessionism is going on in the New Testament. Now, as far as Christians going, we're being supersessionist, they didn't have a word for that. They didn't have that framework available to them. So for a long time, but they were engaging in supersessionism immediately. Okay, it is 6:40. I've gone a little over my scheduled time. I've got to get ready to head to this Sunstone picnic. But thank you everybody for your time and for your attention and for some wonderful questions and wonderful feedback. I really appreciate the support, and it means a lot to hear that what I'm doing is helpful for you. And that only makes me more committed to doing what I'm doing. Will Didascala continue to have lectures every 2 weeks? Maybe. For the next couple of months, yes, we'll have lectures every 2 weeks, but we've got to see if that's kind of diluting the market a little bit. If people are being overwhelmed by so many things being thrown at them, and maybe we should spread them out. We're gonna talk about that. But thank you so much. I will. If you want to sign up on Patreon, I do 2 live streams a month. One for those who have signed up for the live stream level or higher, and then one for the VIP, which also has full access to all of my online classes as well. But this was originally intended to be one of those VIP Patreon live streams, and then the audio wasn't working, and so I had to get out of that, and all I could do was basically do a public live stream. So I hope you have enjoyed it, and if you want more to participate in live streams in a more intimate setting where there are fewer people involved, go ahead and sign up on Patreon, patreon.com/MAKLELAN, Maklelan, my username on my social media. Thank you, everybody. I will see you all next month, and hope you all have a wonderful weekend and enjoy the rest of the summer.